that what we're actually trying to do is find a way to make sure that we're just really engaged with the community and know that 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 what we're doing is matching what the community needs. So that's enough for introductions. Feel free to drop your name and organization in the chat just so we know who's here. That would be wonderful. Fortunately, we don't have time for a full-on icebreaker just because of we just have an hour together, but we would love to know who's here and who's with us today. So please feel free to drop your name and organization in the chat. Thank you, Jackie. Welcome. David, Patricia, thank y'all so much for being here. Hi, Clyde, Allie. So we're gonna get started, and and so the question that we're answering today in this conversation is like, what happens when we let our intent overshadow our impact? And when we think about intent versus impact, oftentimes the way we talk about it is where a lot of the money, where a lot of the all of the kind of like things around a program or a project, where all of the like power lives oftentimes is with the intent. Like, so, you write a grant and you say, hey, our intent is to do this thing in the community, right? And we're going to use this money to do this thing. And, you go through the flow charts of like, where's your inputs and outputs and all of those things to figure out what your impact is going to be. But most of the time, the impact is not really being measured. And oftentimes, just because our intent is to do a certain thing, it doesn't mean that it matches the impact. And so when we think about intent versus impact, intent is where kind of like what we're hoping to do, right? What we want to do. The impact is actually taking off our own goggles and saying, like, taking off of the intent, our intent goggles of what we want to do, taking those off, putting on the like glasses of the community and saying, what is this? How is this going to play out into impact in the community? And so it's like taking off your own glasses, which you see very clearly, and putting on someone else's glasses and trying to see it from their perspective. And so that's a lot of times when we're talking about the impact of something, what that looks like. And so what we're going to do is make this kind of a Q&A between Dana and I around like what we've done at Virginia Community Voice, how we thought about these questions, and then go from there. So and then hopefully y'all have some questions that we can try to answer, or at least try. Hopefully someone else in the space, if we can't answer it, someone else can. So Dana, do you have like anything that you want to say introductory wise before I ask a few questions?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dana. I'm the data analyst and a program manager here at Virginia Community Voice. And like, I will just add before we get into it, like, I really love thinking about measurements and evaluation. I really like to know, like, are we doing a good job, or what could we be doing differently? It's like something that is revealed to you, right, when you can think about it and take the time to plan it properly. But I also know that it can be overwhelming to think about, right? And so, like, not just how we measure, but what we're measuring. Is it the right thing to measure? Like, what are we missing? Is it too onerous for community members? Is it too onerous for staff to be thinking about what to measure, right? And so we always seem to push, I say we as like the grand we, everyone, we always like to push evaluation to the end, or measurement to the end. But I also think it's something that you need to be planning into programs or work that you're doing. And also, we're really used to instant gratification, right? And oftentimes we're expected to be able to measure our impact within the first few months or years of like a grant or a program. And like a lot of times that's driven by funders and grant cycles and our own desire to see things and these changes happen quickly. But I wanted to like just say that incremental change and individual level change is also really just as important. And even though when it feels incremental, it can feel like it's not happening at all, like, it really is an important way to measure and like take a step back to say, how am I making individual change within the community as well? And also, apologies, so I'm like a little sick, so my voice is a little squeaky.
Thanks, Dana. There's lots of grace for being a little sick, especially this time of year. So yeah, if there's ever a time where you're like, Leah, can you just take this? Because I can't. Feel free. But yeah, so let's jump in. So Dana, talk about a little bit about how we have thought about measurement at Virginia Community Voice and like how what like kind of like thought processes we put behind that.
Sure, thank you. Okay, Monty, would you mind going to the next slide, please? Okay. Also, if you have been in our trainings, like Leah has shared before, you have probably seen our theory of change slide, right? And forgive me for looking to the side, I have it bigger over there. So I'll just go through it quickly in case you have not seen it before. But our theory of change is that in 1 to 3 years, we assist neighbors to build trust and collective efficacy around issues within themselves, so self-efficacy and collective efficacy. And that, for us, in our minds and our work, leads neighbors to make meaningful decisions about their communities. By doing all that training in the beginning and working together, they're able to then come together and make meaningful decisions because they have the experience and they've been equipped to make those meaningful decisions. From there, in 3 to 5 years, we see institutions engaging neighbors in marginalized communities more equitably. And that's part of the blueprint side of what we're doing. Also, this is part of our blueprint side, but also because neighbors now have a collective voice and they know how to work together and they've been working together, but also that institutions are ready to listen to them in an equitable way, which leads to then, again, in the 3 to 5 year section, institutions making equitable decisions about resource investment, policy, and programming affecting marginalized communities, which then leads in 5 to 10 years of different community level outcomes. They improve from what we had seen previously with different indicators. And so a lot of times, well, right now where we are in this process is we're in the 3 to 5 year stage. And so I'll just go quickly through what we measure and how we've been measuring it. And so right now, oftentimes we measure the number of people involved in our steering committee and our working groups and our community events. And for us, constant participation helps us determine commitment and that folks find our work and our resources valuable. And that overall participation helps us see how many people we've reached like all together. And we really do work to get those folks that aren't as consistently involved. We work to get them to become consistent participants by doing one-to-ones and other deeper engagement. And we also do qualitative collection by collecting and compiling stories, right? We know that quantitative is helpful a lot of times for grants. You can respond to say, we've engaged this number of people this many times over this amount of time. And funders really love to see that. But there's also a deeper qualitative and story collecting that we like to do because it helps flesh out our impact and to help us really understand what's going on with community members and in the community. And so I'm going to turn it to Leah just quickly because she's shared some really great stories about, well, she shared with us some new qualitative stories. So Leah, would you mind sharing about like the food and stuff, the community gardens? And ARCA.
Yeah. So I think the cool thing is when you start to think about it from both the individual space, because I think a lot of times it's like the societal change, as Dana was kind of saying, that people want to see is like, oh, this is the impact that you're having in the community, and we hype those things up in our grant applications and all those things. We're like, oh yeah, this is the bigger societal change. But honestly, like from our perspective, when we start to think about what real impact we're having, it's about where people are showing up and where people see value. And so one of the stories that felt really impactful for us this year was two of them. One is we have a youth program called ARCA, which is Art, Racial Reconciliation and Civic Advocacy is the acronym ARCA. And so it's a program that focuses on Black youth and Latino youth, bringing them together across kind of the racial divide, the language divide, and all of that, and engaging them with art installations, both public art installations. And So they work with two local artists, Hamilton Glass and Alfonso Perez Acosta, and yeah, and so it's a beautiful program. It's a wonderful program. But one of the things about that program that was really important for us to think about measurement this year was we were in a city park doing an installation, an art installation, and it was the beginning of the program. And it's across the street. The park is across the street from an apartment complex in the South Side of Richmond. If any of you are not from Richmond, is a across the. It's not even open yet. We're working with Parks and Rec to be a part of the community engagement for this park. And one of the neighbors in the apartment complex saw people over there doing something, and she was just like, what is going on? And so she came over and started talking. She was just like, I have never seen anything but homeless people in this park, because again, it's not open and there's some shelter in there and all of that. And so we started to talk to her, and she said, what are you doing? And we started to explain it. And then she started to bring her kids and then bring other kids from the neighborhood, and helped like really build out the program just from having those conversations and seeing the impact and seeing the positive kind of impression that we were having. And so that felt really important. And then after that, started coming to our housing working group, and started coming to our greening working group, and came to our end of year celebration and all of these things. And now is like really interested and engaged in the work because of this just one interaction that led to a ripple effect of more people getting engaged, in her really being a mouthpiece for us in the neighborhood, which feels really impactful. And so that's one. And then another story that I think is really important. One of the things that we're trying to affect in the South Side is the fact that it's a food desert. There are no grocery stores in the South Side. Also trying to rethink about like how we solve the food desert conversation around filling kind of the caloric kind of gap in our communities through community gardens. And so we've been dropping community gardens and engaging neighbors in that process. In neighborhoods, we now have a program where we have garden stewards, so people that will steward the garden even throughout the year, so it doesn't like kind of fall into disrepair, but also just to make sure that the community has healthy food to engage with. And one of our neighbors came back and told me that she was at one of the gardens at Hickory Hill Community Center, which is one of the places we have a garden. So next year when we get the spring harvest, feel free to come through and help us plant, but also help us harvest. So she was leaving the community center, and she saw a family of like 4 kids, like a family of 4, 2 parents and 2 kids, with almost grocery bags, going to the garden and picking the food to take home with them. And she was just looking at it, and at first she was just like, what is going on? And she's like, oh, they're making groceries, and like that's the impact, like that's what we want. And so theoretically that family goes back and says, oh, did y'all know about that garden over at Hickory Hill? You can just go and get that food and take it home and do whatever you need with. And so like, again, that's the individual, that's an anecdotal story, right? But the way that things work in communities is that it's word of mouth. The ripple effects through the community are significant when you take into consideration these individual stories and this individual data that then becomes like larger societal change, because individuals are what move societal change. And so I do think that is a really interesting way to think about how we measure impact. And yeah, Dana, so tell us a little bit more about where we hope to get, where we're trying to get. So you've talked a little bit about what we try to measure, how we think about it, and then also where we are in this theory of change. Where are we hoping to go as we continue to measure?
Sure. Okay. Well, we started as an organization in 2017. As a part of another organization, and then we shifted to our own in 2019. So we're in between like a 4 and 6 year presence on South Side, right? And so that starts to bring us from our theory of change, like from the 3 to 5 years into the 5 to 10 years. And so not that the individual metrics are not important in the self-efficacy metrics are not important, but we also want to start to look out for those community level changes. And so how are we going to measure that? Though I will give like a little bit of a caveat to say, like, sometimes community level changes are really hard, even with a lot of people, because you can have a lot of people organized around one really important thing, and the people in power still don't want to share that power or listen to communities. We can see it. An example of that right now today, with lots of people marching to stop bombing Gaza and Palestine all around the world, and governments continue to support Israel to do that. And so even with a large collection of people, it can be really hard to get what you want done when people in power don't want to share that power. So just like a little bit of a caveat to go on to say, there are still ways to measure your own impact and the impact in communities that you are having, and not to be discouraged, because the individual level changes, the incremental changes are also very important. And so what are we looking at? I guess that's the big question here. So where we hope to go starting this year, and moving through the next few years, so we can understand like year over year changes, is we're looking at both individual, well, I don't want to say both, there's like three things we're looking at. We're looking at individual level changes like we have been, but we're switching it a little bit, like middle level changes. And then we're going to also be keeping track of like community level indicators of like 5-year increments over 10 years. So that's like a little bit of an overview of it. But the individual level changes that we're going to be looking at, it's going to continue to be the number of neighbors we consistently engage with, the number we reach overall. We're also going to be measuring through conversations, or maybe surveys, but we also know that a lot of times people don't like to do surveys. We have team members that don't like to do surveys, not to call out Leah, but Leah hates surveys, even though they're so important for folks that want to collect data. A lot of neighbors don't want to do it. And also people are surveyed to death, like that's too much. And so we also do this through conversations. We want to ask neighbors, do they feel connected to each other? And then around issues or just in general, and then how prepared do neighbors feel to advocate their community for their community. And so that will, for us, get us to see, are we doing a good job connecting neighbors, building that trust amongst neighbors, and are we equipping them so that they feel ready to advocate for their community, right? And then we also want to understand how well Virginia Community Voice, how well neighbors and community members think Virginia Community Voice listened to them over the past year. How well did we as an organization support your visions for the community, and what changes would you like for next year, right? We want to be able to take this time to reflect and also pivot if we need to make sure that we're having the impact we want in the community and not causing harm. And so we also want to ask neighbors, what we don't just want to come in and say, are these the things that we're doing that are helpful? We also want to ask neighbors what they want to get out of engaging with us, and measuring yearly how we're doing, right? And that's also, what the heck is, there's like a specific evaluation term that is not coming to my mind at the moment, impact evaluation, where individuals who you're going to be evaluating are in the process of setting up that evaluation with you so that their voice is heard throughout, and that they know what they want, and we're listening to what they want, and we're also working together to get there. So that's a lot of individual level. For middle level, we're looking at how many meetings that we hosted that had more than a specific number of participants in attendance. We haven't decided that number yet. How many meetings with decision makers did we set up where the community members took the lead in that meeting? So we might do all the background planning, getting the space, asking people to show up. But once everyone shows up, how many meetings did neighbors host and take the lead to share with decision makers what they wanted to see change done in their community? And then also we're going to start hopefully tracking how many hours did Virginia Community Voice staff spend coaching or preparing neighbors to meet with decision makers? And then also, do individuals feel like they're learning to be leaders, or that they have power to make change? And so there's also some middle level indicators for us that are like, did we succeed on neighbor identified issues. And so I know that there's two that we've succeeded on, like big ones that we succeeded on this year, but they of course escaping me. Leah, would you mind sharing about those? Like one was the developers and the other.
So one of the big things that we have been, so for those of you who are new to Virginia Community Voice, my guess is that you've heard something about us before signing up for this training and looked at our website and know a little bit about our mission, but I'll just repeat it for those who need a little bit of a reminder. Our mission, the mission of Virginia Community Voice is to equip neighbors in historically marginalized communities to realize their vision for their neighborhood, and then prepare institutions to respond effectively. So those two kind of pieces is equipping neighbors and preparing institutions. And so when we think about this decision maker space, and when we say decision makers, we typically mean public officials or those who have the power to make the change that the community is asking for. And so in that context is when we say decision makers, that's what we mean. And one of the things that the community this year has been advocating for in one of the neighborhoods, one of the things that we created with neighbors over about 4 years was an equitable development scorecard, which you can find on our website. If you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out to us. We have a training on that, on how to create an equitable development scorecard for your neighborhood. But it really was in response to neighbors saying, like, we're worried about gentrification. We need to figure out how to keep ourselves from getting kicked out of our neighborhoods, and us creating a tool to use for that. Part of the goal was to kind of hold off development that the community didn't want, or insert ourselves in that development to make changes. And so there's a particular development on the South Side. It's a redevelopment of the old Oak Grove School. And while there were some good things about that development, there were several things that the community was really concerned around, about climate change, around affordable housing, and around communal space that would come from that. And we believe if a development is going to a community, then that community needs to have a say in the process. Unfortunately, for the most part, the city process is not great. And when and developers are responsible for their own community engagement in that process, which is just, it's a bad process. And so we were organizing with neighbors to push for some changes in that space. And while we didn't get everything we wanted, and the city wasn't willing to move on many of the things that we were asking them to do, that process was made better because we were involved. And so they did make some concessions on the climate issues that we were pushing for. They made some concessions, some significant concessions on the affordability of the housing, because, for our concern was, you're saying that this is affordable housing you're bringing into a community, but you're starting the affordability at 60% of the AMI when most people in this community live at 40% AMI. That's a 20% difference in what people can afford in the neighborhood, and you're effectively causing gentrification, even if it's affordable housing for other people in the city. And so we were pushing for them to bring that affordability number down to 40% to make it so that some people in the community that live there already can afford to move into these spaces. And they made some concessions on that. And so we did see some incremental change there in this particular development. But part of this theory of change, as you look at it, right? The neighbors build trust and efficacy. They make meaningful decisions about their community. And we're in this space where, like, we're moving into this space where institutions start to engage and make changes based on where we are. And so the community felt connected enough to fight together for this change. And then we actually got institutions to move some too, right? These developers actually moved on some of the things that we had been pushing for several years. And so that's one big one. I'll leave it there just because for time's sake, we want to give you time to ask questions, but that's part of the kind of conversation that we have around movement change. And then that, I will say, the last thing I'll say is the equitable development scorecard. We actually had community members trained to hold our public officials accountable to try and move us closer to a place where the equitable development scorecard can become law and a vetting tool for the city when they bring development to the South Side. And so we had a meeting where we had many of the South Side council members come and make commitments around that. And so those are the two places where we've seen some decision maker change with community members at the center of that.
Julia. Okay, and so last but not least, some of the community member or community level indicators that we're also going to be looking at are a lot of public data sources like the census, even though we do know that for our Hispanic neighbors, they're often undercounted, but census data, education data, public health data. We're going to be doing some observational data. We have not yet decided what we're going to be observing, but observational data is also one of the ones. And then also potentially a community survey where we ask community members about how the changes that they've seen, do they feel more connected to the place? How do they feel about what's going on in their community? Do they feel like they have more power? So, like I said, it's hard sometimes to look at census data year over year, but if you look at it in 5 or 10-year increments, it's much easier to notice changes, but also disaggregating that data specifically for Southside. And so with that, we want to open it up to your questions, or like if you all also have measurements and indicators that you use that you found particularly revealing or helpful, we would love to hear about that too. Like this is also a time, like Leah said, to share with each other, and also a time to ask us questions. And when people ask questions, others feel free to jump in as well, right? Like if you think you have the, or you have an answer, you want to share your experiences around that question, please also do that. This is like a space for all of us to share.
Well, and I will say one thing is like a takeaway from this conversation, and hopefully that will kind of prompt some more conversation. Is the way that you start to measure the intent that you had in the community versus like and map it onto the impact that you're actually having is by having community members. This is always our thing, having the people that are being impacted by the program, by the thing that you're doing at the center of developing those measurements, understanding what we're talking about, making sure that they are super, you can't go into a community even if it's a program that they ask for, and you as the institution be the only ones measuring what you want to see out of that, right? You also have to engage those that are going to be impacted by the program, by the thing that you're doing into the measurement. And so that is, I hope, what you've seen us illustrate over our time is having neighbors at the center of just determining what we do, what we say. Any surveys that we do, any impact conversations that we're having, we're asking them first, what should we be measuring? What are you thinking about? Like, what does this make sense? Is this something that we need, right? They're engaged in the process throughout the process. And that's the way that your impact starts to match the intent of what you're doing, and maybe even change the intent because you realize that what neighbors want and what you potentially were offering doesn't match. And so then you change, the intent often ends up changing because we're looking at what the actual impact is. And so, what we know about impact is that often is where harm is caused. And so what we're trying to do is minimize harm or have no harm at all, because we're engaging the people that are impacted by the things that we're doing in every step of the process. And so that's the last thing that I'll kind of say as like the big takeaway from the conversation. And so my question to you is like, have you all experienced spaces where you have engaged community in the impact indicators and it has gone well, or it hasn't gone well, or you're trying to figure out like what a process like that would look like? Feel free to offer any questions or thoughts about that. And Monty, you can take us out of screen share so that we can see people. Thanks. Feel free to come off mute or put a question in the chat if you would prefer not to say something out loud. Have any of you had experiences with trying to measure impact alongside community members? And what does that look like?
I can share a little bit. At Sportable, we recently started a program with our athletes called the Athlete Ambassadors. And in a way, like, it's not specifically just about impact, but we get qualitative information about our impact through conversations with our athletes in that process. And it's been very eye-opening, and especially as a person, because we serve people with disabilities, as a person who doesn't have a disability, it is always interesting to hear what they have to say and to get the lived experience and things like that, that we would never know having not, you know, had a disability or you know, gone through that lived experience.
And how has that informed the way that you all think about your impact in with communities, right? Like, so there's information that you're getting that you wouldn't have gotten if you didn't have those in that interaction. How has that affected the impact of your programs and like the way that you think about that? Or has it yet? Maybe it hasn't yet, but like, how,
I
like,
mean, it has. I'm not the best with examples all the time, but one example that I think of is that during when we're giving disability, we call them disability etiquette trainings, kind of, sort of, and we are just informing, you know, different schools and organizations about you know, just, I guess, proper disability etiquette. And one thing that I learned during our acid, or that I was opening my eyes to, was that we were talking about I don't remember what we were talking about, but not only asking if somebody with a disability needs help in a certain situation, because a lot of times people will just help them without, you know, without asking. And so not only asking if I can help, but also asking how I can help, because it's important not just to make sure you're helping that person, but to help them in a way that is actually helpful. And I think that really links back to what y'all talk about getting into the community, about asking, hey, what do you want, community, and then how are we going to do that together, and how do you want to see that actualized?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, David. Any other thoughts, questions, or anecdotes about how your impact has mapped onto your intent, or how maybe your impact has changed your intent?
Hey Leah, it's Libba.
Right.
So just a quick note, we had a rebrand this year. So we are what Virginia Community Capital used to be. And Florencia came on to our all staff meeting, I guess almost 2 years ago, and you were able to come by too.
Yep.
Masks on, a common house. So it's really good to see y'all again. I appreciate this free training. So y'all know a little bit about us, but I think, from my opinion, we still struggle with like the community engagement conversation overall, like what that means to us as an organization. So we provide financing for a lot of community development focus areas, affordable housing, small business, clean energy, fresh food. So when we talk about community engagement, we're mostly sharing information about how we interact with our borrowers at our financial institution. And what we've been really trying to get at more is go one level deeper to hear from the community members, like what you and your team do, mostly in Southside. So I'd say there still is a gap there. And I think we could still learn a lot about collecting that qualitative data to understand more like how we should shift our programs and services.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially from a funding or like a financial kind of space, how to engage community in that way, because, you know, the borrowers, right, are that's one interfacing, but then the question then becomes like, are the people that are borrowing, are they aligned with what the community wants for their neighborhoods, what they want to see? Like, you know, maybe we're giving money to this restaurant, but is this the kind of restaurant that the community wants in their neighborhood? Or maybe we're giving money to this project or this program, and what does that look like? And then what we actually learned in this process with the development of affordable housing in the Oak Grove neighborhood was, you know, we actually did go to the funders in that conversation, to the bank that was funding the project, and said, hey, listen, the engagement that the developers are telling you that they're doing in the community isn't really matching up with what the community wants. And right. And so like, but from a funding perspective, they were like, well, we can't do anything. We're just a bank. And we're like, are you sure? Because the money is what makes the project possible. So like, it feels like maybe there is something you can do.
Right.
And so finding ways to get closer to what but you know, the funder in the conversation, they were like, we never get to hear from the community. We never get to hear from those that are you know, going to be impacted by the development that we're funding. And so we're grateful for that, but we don't really know what to do with that. And so, you know, we also saw that as an opportunity to say, wait, yeah, that needs to be a part, especially these community funders like Virginia Community Capital, or what did y'all rebrand to?
Locust.
I was like, Locust. Who is Locust? I saw all of these locusts. I was like, what is Locust? Okay, all right. But right, so like thinking about how to get closer to those spaces, and we would love to engage in more conversation about what that could look like for y'all. But I do think that that's a really important piece, because you're missing. And so like, again, for this development, we weren't saying as a community, we don't want affordable housing. What we were saying, and, you know, and we don't want this, this school that has been vandalized and has been vacant for, 15 years to be redeveloped. What we are saying, though, is that there are other things that need to be included in this for the community to feel like they're getting a benefit out of this project. And as a funder, the goal would be that you would hold the developers accountable to making that happen, right? If the city's not going to do it, then as a funder, right? And so thinking about what policies can we change, what things can we look at to put ourselves in a little bit more in that communal space, so that we can actually hold the developers or the people that we're funding accountable to make sure that they're engaging with community in these conversations. So that's something, yeah, absolutely, that can kind of change the way that you think about your impact. So it's not just how many dollars have we gotten into communities that have been historically marginalized, but also like, what is the impact of those dollars in that community, and how then is the community going to interact with this thing that now exists in their community that didn't exist before? So those, yeah, Dana, do you have anything to add to that? Okay. Sorry, I didn't. Yeah.
No, that was great. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Leah.
Any other thoughts or questions? It's okay, we can wait. I know sometimes it takes a minute for people to get the courage to ask the question, but we're happy to live in a little bit of the silence. Dana, do you have any other thoughts or things that you want to add to kind of our process around development? I will tell one quick story before, to give you a minute to think, because I just put you on the spot. But yeah, so like one of the things that I do think that is a big part, especially from a nonprofit perspective, when you're thinking about impact, is also the impact of the funders that you are engaging with, right? So those who are funding your projects and programs. I was in a conversation with a funder the other day, and the program, they were a program manager, and they were saying how, they are continually fighting for multi-year and general operating funds for organizations. And one of the things that, I don't know how many of you know, I'm coming to you, Sharice. I don't know how many of you know that, like, with foundations, typically they're only giving about 5% of the overall income that they're making. Like, so it's only 5% off of their total amount that they're giving away. The rest of it just sits there and accruing interest, but they only give about 5% of that. And so I was like, well, let's take it up to a tithe, right? Like, let's take it up to 10% and get it to a place where you're giving more to organizations that people of color, because historically we don't get that much from foundations. And they were saying that their board was pushing back against that and saying, well, before we can do anything like that, we need to see more societal changes before we can invest more in the community. And I just thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, if you don't invest in the community, you can't see the changes, and it has to be long term, because it didn't take us 5 minutes to get to where we are. It's taken us hundreds of years to get to where we are. And so if you want to see real change, you have to really invest in that change, because there is a lot of investment in keeping that change from happening. And it was just really interesting because, you know, when you're thinking about impact, a lot of times people feel kind of tied by their funders or by whoever is saying what they should be doing around impact. And we don't know, like, I don't know if that funder, if the board member that said that to that funder is measuring impact the way we measure impact, right? And so it's a lot of those questions too. So feel free to offer any other thoughts or conversation around funding kind of, you know, discrepancies in impact. But Sharice, let me come to you. What was your question or thought?
Well, I was just thinking, you keep using the word intention and impact, but I think the word that's often missing in this equation is care. And that's why most people don't consider even what their impact is, because
Absolutely.
we've created some kind of silo of individualism within our culture. And that a lot of times we say, well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings.
Yep.
But the care part, if you care, is that I am so sorry, that was not my intention, although it impacted you that way, right? So we can change our perspective, and maybe come with a level of care, and also feel like a safe space. We always talk about the level of trust we have to give, and that's only quantifiable of time.
Yeah.
And you don't know how long it takes you, and also how easily it is to lose trust. And that's why, you know, something we've been working on in our own groups is like quantifying what those measurements look like, so that we can, you know, those tangibles, it's important, right? So, you know, we adding our core value is care makes a whole nother element around how we will quantify the progress that we want to make. And so desperately look to, you know, change the narrative. And something I really admire about our leader, Amir, is that, you know, he knows that he's creating this space that is kind of new, and someone has to be the innovator. You have no model to look after. You kind of just have to make it and be bold enough to stand in those spaces. And it's scary, you know, being the person who has to speak up, you know, because again, you know, the machine is the machine, and it sucks, but you know, it happens, but it needs to happen. And I'm very grateful for our organization and the progress that we've made thus far, and look forward to what we'll continue to do next year.
Yeah. Are you with Locust too, Sharice?
Yes. I'm one of the Locust people.
I love that. So, you know, one of the things, so I was doing a talk at the University of Kentucky a couple of weeks ago, and someone came up to me and she said, you know, after the talk, and she was just like, what I need to understand is like, how do we think about, because, you know, when we are in the communities, and I was talking about how universities and can have better community relationships and do better in that space, and which is a long road for historic universities and large universities and communities. And so she came up to me and she said, how do we, you know, most people are used to us coming in as UK, like coming in with the big, like, you know, like we're the big institution and we know all the things, right? How do we change that perception? And I said, well, name that, like name that that's been the history, right? And it blew her mind. She was just like, oh, name it, like say what we've done in the past. And I said, yeah. And I think it really ties into what you're talking about around care, because at the end of the day, we know that institutions have caused harm. We know financial institutions have caused harm. You know, I literally just are going through a process with Virginia Community Voice around a racist banking engagement, right? And so we know that these things have caused harm. And so naming that harm, naming what we have done, and saying, hey, listen, whether or not I was there, whether or not I was engaged with this process, whether or not, right, I'm sorry. And I want to pivot, I want to turn, and I want to do better. And then engaging the people in how are we going to do better, right? That's what's caring. That's what's going to move us closer to a place where we can be trusted and we can be engaged with in real ways, and people can be honest. I think the other big thing from an institutional perspective, especially financial institutions, is being able to say like, hey, we're not going to get defensive when people name things, even if it wasn't our fault, even if that thing was this other bank over here, or this other person over here, or this other thing over here. We're not going to get defensive. We're going to say, hey, you know what? We're big enough to handle, right? Whatever we're being thrown, right? Again, that's a caring response, right? Like if we go to the South Side and people, tell us about, oh, this nonprofit came in and they did this and this, and then this nonprofit came in and they did this and this. You know what? I know that wasn't us, but I'm not going to sit there and say, well, it wasn't us that did that, so why are you acting like, right? Like that's not the response. The response is, I am so sorry that happened. That's not what we're trying to do. Can we work with you to figure out how we can keep from doing that same kind of harm in the community, right? Can we make sure that we're putting things in place to keep us from having that kind of impact in your community, in your neighborhood, with your family and friends and neighbors, and that's really the care piece. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment, Sharice, and a beautiful way to think about it, because I think a lot of times people we get defensive, it gets hard, we don't know how to say, I'm sorry for something that someone else did, or I'm sorry for the history of our institutions in your communities, and we're going to do better, right? And that care piece, I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
I just want to add something else. So I worked in subsidized housing for 10 years, and we used to have, I won't say what college it is, they will remain nameless, but they are always in the papers. I went to Liberty, and the kids, I just said it, the kids would come. We have to do, part of our graduation credits was we had to do community service. And when I worked at the subsidized housing place, they would come and they'd go knock on the doors and be like, hey, we want to do our community service. But the kids were like, we don't know you. They come like once a quarter. And I was like, those kids are not going to come outside to play with you so you can get your hours. You come once a quarter. Like we had multiple institutions want to come once a year. I mean, it's all institutions. The police department want to come Christmas time to give out gifts. You don't ever come no other time unless somebody's in trouble. People want to do good, have a food truck. They come once a year again, and then want people to be grateful that they have given them something.
Yes.
Like, y'all, that's not how that works. That's not even how real life works. So why would you think that because someone is what you feel is doesn't have whatever that thing is, like they should be? I saw this one story where we know I just moved to Richmond a little less than 2 years ago, and there's a lot of homeless people here. I've never seen this kind of level of it in Lynchburg. They have a lot of programs, and I'm kind of confused because again, I'm still new, so I don't know if there's programs here. But anyways, this homeless guy was sitting down, and this guy gave him a sandwich. And he went into the store, and then he looked back before he walked to the door and saw the homeless man throw it in the trash. And he was so confused. And of course, he went on Reddit and said his little stuff. And then he was like, he said he went back to the guy, and the guy said, you had stuff on there that I couldn't eat. If you have celiac, if you're lactose intolerant, you can't just because the person doesn't have, doesn't mean that they will take anything.
Yep.
Where is that care? If your intentionality,
ask the question.
Ask the question. And if your intentionality is to be impactful to that person, and you ask and you care, hey, instead of giving them money because you've now concocted in your mind that they're going to use it for drugs or X, Y, and Z, whatever that might look like, then let's take the extra steps and say, hey, I'm about to come to the store. Would you like to come pick out something so you can have something to eat?
Yep. Absolutely.
But that takes too many steps sometimes, right?
Yes. And asking the question, asking what people need is a huge part of those conversations. Thank you, Sharice. And I want to get to Darian and to Ashley before we have to say goodbye to you today. So Darian, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for having this space to hold. I am a project producer with a organization called The Gradient, and we just honestly are in our beginning stages, like the 1 to 3 years, how you all constructed that theory of change. We're building our neighbors and stuff like that. And we figured out this year, like collaboration is really how we are get on the sphere of launching things. So we're still molding and stuff like that, but we have cracked the code of like, okay, collaborating with our neighbors. Because we are in similar spaces of like creativity and people who are in small businesses. We want to connect with our neighbors and collaborate with them, because what we've noticed is like social media. We are like social media and collaboration is like what has been helping us this year. So I just want to thank you for just like encouraging that and like reaffirming that it is our neighbors that helps build the community, and just doing right by people. And eventually like the vision will become a lot more clear as we make those intention decisions, and it molds what our overall mission is. So yeah, I just want to thank you again. And yeah, just collaboration and neighbors, honestly,
Yeah.
and taking care of people.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing that up. But, and also, you know, it's not easy. It's not always the clearest picture right when you start, right? Like when you're trying to build those things, like you're just like, okay, this person wants this, and this person wants this, and this person wants this. How does that all fit together, right? And so if you ever need some guidance or some just a sounding board for questions in that as you're building that process, please reach out to us, because that's what our space is for, is to help create community around these ideas and these processes and these thoughts, to make sure that people start with that. Let me ask the community first and then build the things later. Because if I start with building what I think is going to be right and I don't ask, I'm gonna end up with somebody throwing my sandwich in the trash, right? Like that's where it's gonna end up, because it's not working. Ashley, let's get to you before we have to go.
Yes, thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Ashley. I'm with Locus Impact as well. My specific question is really around, so I'm in a action team group along with Liba and Sharice, and this is basically our effort to incorporate not only DEI strategic, I guess you could say DEI strategic plan into the people we serve, but also internally with our organization. And our specific group focuses on education and training. And I guess my question would be, how have y'all seen examples with other organizations, or what guidance would you have around organizations who are in that phase or stage where we're trying to shift some cultural things, and ultimately like requiring everyone to be a student and unlearning and relearning some things, that's for the benefit of the larger goal or the prize of, while we're doing this work. I guess, like, could you provide any examples of ways that has been helpful for other organizations to be more in alignment and steering in that direction, and kind of uprooting some of the old ways, and then like relearning new ways to be thinking about the work that we do specifically and the people we serve, but also the people who are doing the serving, right? Like us internally as staff and admin and stuff like that. So like, yeah, that's basically my question. Like what, or even if it's just one thing that you feel like this is something that has worked for others that can help like shift the trajectory internally.
Yeah. Dana does a lot of our work with other institutions in our blueprint, and training and coaching, preparing other institutions to respond effectively. So I know there are lots of stories there that you can jump in with.
Yes, thank you. I would say one of the first things you could do is look inward at your organization, like I think you're already doing, to say, what are some barriers that we face when trying to engage with community members? And whether it's like you don't know anyone from that community, then it's probably time to start like a non-transactional engagement with those folks. Hiring folks from the communities that you're working in, and then making sure Though I say that with like the caveat to say like make sure your institution is ready to support those folks, because perhaps they've not been in an institution like a funder before, or maybe once they get there they don't see any incentive to stay because the space isn't really set up for them. And there's a lot of different things you can do, like making sure there's equitable pay. Thank you, Charisse. And like making sure that people really do feel listened to. And so I think the first thing I think like you're doing already is looking in to see where can we change internally to make it more equitable for staff that are already at this institution, and then working to bring in folks from the community, right? Because one thing that we like to say is don't hire people that look like the community, hire from the community. And so that is, I would say maybe the first thing is where are your processes internally that don't feel equitable, and then look at those and how to change those processes to be more equitable, whether it's listening to like the frontline employees better and incorporating their thoughts and their ideas all the way from frontline to board members, and then looking to start like really relationship building with communities, not just like a drop in and then leave, but like really taking the time to get to know the people that you are ultimately serving, which sounds easy when I say it, but it does take a long time. So
Yeah.
give yourself some grace in that too.
Thank you, Liva. And the one last thing that I'll say to add to that, Ashley, and I know this might feel a little bit removed from kind of your question, but I do think, and I think Charisse was saying a little bit about this earlier about like not necessarily having a blueprint for it, but trying things. And so we talk about radical imagination a lot, right? Having an imagination for something that might not like be what typical financial institutions do, or, that, not crossing any, legal lines, but saying like, let's push the boundaries of what we typically do in these spaces, and let's have an imagination for how we can be different. And I think, and because imagination requires the ability for people to breathe, to have time, to like have creative spaces, I also think it's really important from an internal perspective to think about the rest of the staff, of the people in the community, right? Especially those of you that are people of color that have experienced the negative impacts of financial institutions, that have been in those spaces, your frontline people that are directly facing, and like what does rest look like? One thing that we've done at Virginia Community Voice for our staff is to say, listen, outside of what we're doing in the community, we're going to have spaces for people to be able to rest, because rest allows for imagination, and imagination is what is going to, change the way that we do things in our communities. And so, so we have quarterly rest breaks internally for our staff, where we shut down the organization once a quarter to spend time giving people time to rest. And then when we come back, we can have some innovative spaces and innovative thoughts and innovative ideas about how we can do things differently and engage in radical imagination. And so I do think that that's another kind of piece, that is added to Dana's thing, but maybe that's the precursor to it, is thinking about like, how do we support our staff so that then when we start to kind of develop whatever we're going to develop, we have the space and time and energy to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And always reach out to us. Y'all are welcome always to reach out to us. Well, we are at 106. Thank y'all for those of you who have stayed. Like we said, we do coaching and training on this work. Our coaching process is a little bit more in depth. So for those of you who have already been through some of our trainings, feel free to reach out to us about coaching, because we'd love to help and more in depth in these processes with you. Reach out to Flo or Dana. They are our Blueprint team or piece. They are all a part of our Blueprint team pieces, making sure she gets everybody's contact information and websites in the chat. So yeah, thank y'all so much, and have a happy time, holiday, whatever you celebrate. Please feel free or please make sure that you have some time to rest and to connect and to restore over this holiday season. Thank y'all so much for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Bye, everyone.